Throughout the long, violent arc of human history, empires have been forged by two things: the strength of their swords and the value of their coins. The Romans had the denarius, the British had the pound. But in the modern era, the world bows to only one king, a green piece of paper known as the United States dollar. We are told that the war in Iraq was fought over hidden weapons and dangerous dictators. But if you strip away the political speeches and look at the cold, hard timeline of history, a much darker reality emerges. The invasion of Iraq was not a military necessity. It was a violent, multi-trillion-dollar rescue mission. And to understand what they were rescuing, we must travel back in time, not to Baghdad, but to the scorching deserts of Saudi Arabia in the year 1971. In the early 1970s, the American empire was bleeding. President Richard Nixon had just severed the US dollar from the gold standard. Suddenly, American money was just paper. It had no physical value. Washington was terrified that the global economy would abandon them. So they orchestrated the greatest financial pact in human history. American diplomats traveled to the oil-rich kingdoms of the Middle East and offered a simple, unbreakable deal. We will protect your thrones with the full might of the United States military, but in exchange, you must demand that every drop of oil you sell to the world is purchased strictly in US dollars. They agreed. The petrodollar was born. From that day forward, if a nation like Japan, France, or China wanted to power their cities and run their factories, they had no choice. They had to stockpile billions of American dollars just to buy energy. It made the United States financially immortal, until one man decided to challenge the throne. Fast forward to the year 2000. In the ancient lands of Mesopotamia, a dictator named Saddam Hussein stood upon the second largest ocean of oil on the planet, and he decided to commit the ultimate financial heresy. Saddam announced to the world that Iraq would no longer accept the American dollar. He called it the currency of the enemy. From that moment on, Iraqi oil would be sold exclusively in euros. Washington mocked him. Financial experts predicted his economy would collapse. But then, the winds of history shifted.
The euro began to rise. Iraq started making a fortune. Suddenly, a terrifying realization echoed through the halls of the Pentagon. Saddam had proven that a nation could abandon the US dollar and survive. If the rest of the Middle East followed his lead, the American economy would face catastrophic hyperinflation. The foundation of the empire was cracking. Saddam had to be made an example of.
3 years later, the skies over Baghdad ignited. The world was told a terrifying story of weapons of mass destruction. The military swept across the desert, and the regime fell in a matter of weeks. But history asks us to look past the smoke of the battlefield and look at the ledgers of the banks. By June 5, 2003, barely 2 months after American tanks entered the city, the new transition government signed a quiet, almost invisible decree. Every single Iraqi oil account was liquidated. The euro was banished. All oil sales were forcefully returned to the United States dollar. They searched the deserts, but they never found the weapons of mass destruction they promised the world. But they did not need to, because they had successfully rescued the only weapon that truly mattered: their currency. In April of 2003, the ancient city of Baghdad fell. To the watching world, it was broadcast as a moment of liberation. Statues crumbled and tanks rolled through the dust of Mesopotamia. But in the chaos of the collapsed regime, the city was plunged into absolute anarchy. The National Museum of Iraq, holding the oldest recorded history of human civilization, was violently looted. Libraries burned to the ground. Hospitals were stripped bare. The cradle of civilization was being reduced to ashes, and the military did not have the manpower to stop it. But amidst the burning ruins and the screaming streets, the American military did establish a ring of impenetrable steel around one specific location. They did not protect the museums. They did not protect the hospitals. They dispatched hundreds of heavily armed troops to form a barricade around a single massive building. The Ministry of Oil. While the history of humanity burned in the streets, the records of the oil reserves were locked down and protected with lethal force. To the architects of the invasion, the artifacts of the past were irrelevant.
The true objective was the black blood buried beneath the desert floor.
Securing the ministry meant securing the maps, the ledgers, and the exact coordinates of the second-largest unexploited oil reserve on Earth. The military phase of the invasion was over. The corporate phase was about to begin. You cannot conquer a nation in the 21st century and simply steal its wealth. That is an act of piracy. If you want to take a nation's wealth, you must do it legally. You must rewrite their laws. Enter a man named Paul Bremer, the head of the Coalition Provisional Authority. In September of 2003, he signed a decree that completely dismantled the economic sovereignty of Iraq. It was known as Order 39. Order 39 was a masterpiece of corporate warfare. Overnight, it decreed that foreign corporations could now own 100% of Iraqi businesses. It decreed that these corporations could send every single penny of their profits completely out of the country, tax-free. And most devastatingly, it forced the privatization of over 200 state-owned Iraqi companies.
Iraq was not being rebuilt. It was being liquidated. The gates were thrown open, and the largest corporate feeding frenzy in modern history began.
But Order 39 was just the legal framework. To execute a heist of this scale, you need physical liquidity. Between May 2003 and June 2004, the skies over Baghdad witnessed one of the most surreal logistical operations in human history. The Federal Reserve in New York packed $12 billion, pure physical cash, onto wooden pallets. It weighed over 360 tons. They loaded it onto military cargo planes, flew it directly into Baghdad, and distributed it across the war zone. It was meant for reconstruction. But in the fog of war, tracking physical cash is impossible, and the architects of the invasion knew that. Within months, over $8 billion of that cash simply vanished. No receipts, no ledgers, no accountability. It evaporated into the desert air, swallowed by shadow contractors, corrupt officials, and ghost companies. While the physical cash disappeared, the true wealth of the nation was being carved up in Washington, and no corporation feasted heavier than Halliburton.
Before the invasion even began, Halliburton was quietly awarded massive, multi-billion-dollar contracts to rebuild Iraq's oil infrastructure. But these were not normal contracts. They were no bid, meaning the government didn't even allow other companies to compete for the job. They simply handed the keys to the kingdom to one corporation, a corporation that, remarkably, was previously run by the Vice President of the United States.
The American taxpayer funded the invasion. The Iraqi people paid the ultimate price. But the private military contractors, the logistics firms, and the oil giants, they experienced the most profitable quarter in modern corporate history. The history books will tell you that the invasion of Iraq was a war of liberation. They will tell you it was a desperate hunt for weapons that never existed. They will frame it as a military failure.
But the war ledger tells a different story. If you look strictly at the balance sheet, it was a flawless execution. It was the hostile takeover of a sovereign nation, the violent defense of a global currency, and the greatest transfer of wealth the 21st century has ever seen. The next time the empire beats the drums of war, do not look at the battlefield. Look at the banks.